it's lovely to be here, and it's really fun that we get the chance to say hello to you all virtually, and hopefully answer a few questions that you guys have sent to us. Before Robyn and I started up Lovework Studio, I was creative director at DesignStudio in London for 4 years. And before that, I was a design director at Wolff Olins, and I was there for 7 years. So getting a really broad range of experience in design, of course, brand design, but also brand strategy.
And I freelanced at lots of different places in London, and also started my own creative practice in Cambridge, working on some cultural brands and some tech startups and those sorts of things. So it's been really interesting working with Campbell this last year.
And we've also got a couple of designers as well. We've got Ashley and we've got Lucinda, who are also part of our team. And we're looking to hire a senior designer at the moment as well. A little bit about us before I jump into the project. So we're set up to work remotely. So we work on international branding projects, pretty much everywhere, with a team of amazing people that we've met and worked with over the years, from strategists, creatives, designers, animators, 3D people, specialists in all kinds of different areas. And our team, we're based in Australia. We're in Brisbane. It's just been flooding here like crazy. Luckily, our house didn't get flooded out, but so we've been very fortunate. But we've got designers in Sydney and Melbourne who kind of work with us on a full-time basis. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for loads of amazing work coming through, which was super, super cool. That we could have a little look-see at. So this is Marinella on the call?
Hi, yes.
Hi.
Hi.
I'd love to hear about this project, the memoir project. Who's the client?
No, this is a school project, actually. So this was for a second-hand bookstore, and it was asked to create a brand identity from scratch. And we had to decide naming, the visual language, and which path we wanted I wanted to take to create this brand. So since I love books, I decided to create something for a secondhand book. And like the process that you showed to us is a bit very similar to what I had done, maybe is more in detail. And here, for example, for the naming, I came up from the brand values that were about caring, welcoming, and something that is for a place for the surrounding community when people can talk with each other and then have let's say like a time with no rush. So to create something. Memoir is like a remembrance of memories, maybe memories that were cherished for the past readers, but as well for the next readers who will come on. And I wanted to create something that is still connected with the past, but is modern. So I used a sans serif font and then still have that details from slab serif fonts. And since it will be a community where people can share their knowledge or their passion, and is as well as giving a new beginning for these old books. So that's how I came up with the visual languages. And I wanted to create a tone of voice that it was warm, welcoming, and still like has this old charm from the past. So that's why I created this range of different color palettes and as well illustrations. And that I worked on the copy and to create exactly the campaign and advertisement. This is very short, in a few words.
Awesome.
And that's it.
It's really It's really lovely. I do love the. I actually really love the symbols, really kind of bold and unexpected, which I thought was really interesting. And then also the colors I loved as well. Like these feel really, distinctive and fresh. They go away from that kind of very trendy, poppy color palette.
I also really like the the placement of the logo is quite unexpected as well
yeah, because I wanted to be illuminated by the light, so to give it more focus in it.
It's really fun. I think probably if I was only going to give any, I think it's really fantastic work. But I think if I was going to give any criticism, it might just be potentially at this point here where I was like, what's going on here? But I imagine this is just like was as you were kind of going into the concept. Because I was like looking at these typefaces and thinking they don't match and they don't match this typeface.
Okay.
And so I was a bit confused at that point. But then when I saw some of this stuff coming together, it all felt like it hung together a lot better when it was just illustrations and colours and the block. The only bit that probably on the mark that I wasn't sure about was actually this container shape.
Okay.
The outside shape. I like this inside. You work really hard to get this nice contained unit, but then they felt like there's this other thing which is like a bit of a different story going on with this other, shape
Bible message,
kind of sticking in. So, you've done that initial craft so well, and then just let it be and, put it up in the corner somewhere, and it looks super cool.
Can I ask a question? Like, what do you think about the pacing? Is it working, or I need to focus more on telling what's behind all this visual system that I created?
No, I liked your storytelling and how you did it. I would probably normally have, probably another page or two, just going into a little bit more around the story, around this symbol itself. Where did it come from? Like, is it, why is it these pages of the book? And because sometimes, people might not even see, I mean, they probably would see this, but, maybe they wouldn't notice something around this M symbol that you've created that could be really cool that you should be sharing with them or telling them. I'm going to jump to the next project now, but thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you so much for the reviews.
I thought this was really interesting. I would have loved to have heard from Chelsea because she was actually part of the team. She was, I think, an internal designer working there at Square when they did the transformation and became Block. And I thought, for me, this project was a really, really interesting one when I saw it come out because it was so weird and like unexpected from, all of the other startups and everyone that's doing that very kind of flat, minimal aesthetic with, bright colors and shapes and things like that, simple shapes. And then suddenly this comes out and, has, it's quite fun and refreshing. Although I'd probably still say a little bit weird. But there's a little video as well here, which I thought was really interesting. Block is I think it's the company that sits above all of these ones. So coming together, so Square, super well known, famous payment platform, etc. And it's just really interesting. So very fascinating project. I'd love to hear more, but was reviewed, of course, by and at under consideration, which is always a little bit scary. Is Julia on the call? Would you like to go through some of your projects as well? Because there was some more really, really beautiful work in here too. Again, a lovely piece. And then we had a studio, or is this an individual? Raw Studio on the call. But this one really caught my eye as well. From what I thought was interesting here is, I guess, kind of the normal approach for a branding agency or a design studio is to really lead with your work, but actually here it's almost leading with the energy and the words and the person as well. And so I wanted to hear around a little bit, that was making me think like this is a different approach. Well, I think that's really good in a weird way because it's not what everyone's doing. So actually you will stand out when you go to the site. But at the same time, I kind of get down here and I'm like, show me the work. Where's the work? give me the work, and you eventually get to the work. I'm like, this is a bit, I really care about. I want to see these kind of amazing projects you're doing as well. But really interesting approach. So, it'd just be interesting to hear if this, does this work or not. Let's move on. Let's go to some questions now.
How do you measure the success of a rebrand? Is any thoughts on that?
I think also it's how well embedded into the team and how the internal team has it wrong, and how much do they love it, and how much can they get behind it and really believe in it? Is it authentically them? I think that's really tough to measure.
Do you use any metrics, any post-launch, questionnaires, research metrics, anything else you look at or the client gives you to say, well done, or anything like that?
Obviously, it would definitely depend on the project. So we'll always ask at the start of the project, during that immersion phase, what does success look like for you with the rebrand? And that's often quite an insightful question to ask anyway, or even at pitch stage when you're pitching for a project, because how they answer that will probably determine whether you want to take on the job or not anyway. Because if they're very much around incremental revenue success within a 3-month to 6-month time period, it's not going to be a great branding project, because actually branding, typically when you do it really well and you launch it out into the world, success will take at least 6 months and probably longer, probably more like a year or 2 years before you really see how successful that new strategy and design work has been. So it needs to be a longer term goal. So it might be an awareness goal. Do people know the brand more? Do they love the brand more? There's a whole bunch of typical metrics that people typically go searching for. And some of those ones are really good. Like, would you recommend the brand going forward? Is it something, is a question that they ask, and how well, how often people recommend the brand, or how much they love the brand, basically, is a kind of a key metric that you want to obviously elevate. I've seen several of the brands that I worked on at DesignStudio, and even brands that Robyn and I worked on in the past before we started up Lovework Studio, that have been phenomenally successful after the rebrand, and maybe received 500 million in funding 6 months after the rebrand. So I've seen it firsthand, phenomenal success from rebrands, both financially, but also like Rob was talking about, like the team getting behind it, getting involved, better team spirit. Also seeing things like users increase or viewers increase. So the LEC was a rebrand, which is an esport for League of Legends. And their viewers, immediately after launch, there was a 40% increase in viewers. So, you can have some really big stats that come from a rebrand, but I would always warn people at the start and say, I'd almost say, yes, you can be really successful doing a rebrand if everyone internally gets involved and everyone gets really committed and you change the whole way your business works and you do a really cool rebrand and make it look really cool, then you will be really successful, but it's not going to come as incremental revenue within the 3 months to 6 month period, which is normally when people ask that question. They're like, what's the metric? And it's like, it's normally clients asking about, will it make us more money? And the answer is yes, but long term.
Does one really need a formal brand strategy, or does a viable alternative shortcut for the creative process exist?
Oh yeah, do we actually? I love this question. Do we actually need a formal brand strategy? You do. I think if you want it, that last question, if you really want to be successful, if you want to stand out, position the brand differently, do better work, actually. Do some more disruptive, crazy, like the crazy block one we were just looking at. If you want to do something that's really unexpected, you have to do a positioning exercise with the company so that they're comfortable with where you're going to go strategically. And it's something that makes sense for them and links everything up with their business. Because actually it's very rare that you just do cool graphics and it goes through. So I'd say it's very important, but if you don't do the strategy, a strategy has to exist. So you can always ask, what is your current brand strategy? Are you really happy with it? And if they're like, yeah, I love it, you say, okay, give it to me, help me to understand it. Let's kind of get up to speed really quickly over, a really short period of time, like a week, instead of spending 3 weeks doing the full brand strategy kind of business, or just not full, I'd say doing your core brand strategy components. Then you potentially could say, okay, we'll use that. I like it. It makes sense to me. Now, we can bring it to life with the design. So you can, if there's an existing strategy. One thing I just check though is, do you like it? Do you believe it? Do you think it works for their business? And if it doesn't, then you really should be doing some work, and you actually have to say, because otherwise you'll just create something random.
How do you go about in your process not getting stuck on trends? When and where do you go to for inspiration?
So, like I was showing probably in the work that we were putting together and things like that, it's a real, I think you've got to make sure that you might end up creating something, you get somewhere and you feel like, that's cool, but I'm very familiar with that. And I'm happy with it, and the client's happy with it, everyone's happy with it, everyone's high-fiving. That's often because it exists. It's actually someone else's design, someone else has done, that's kind of out there in the world. And so you've actually got to really push really hard to do something that feels fresh and interesting. And so you've really always got to push your own design to another level that you're uncomfortable with before it is really going to be something that moves away from a trend.
I'd say definitely having a studio culture that feels safe, where people can share things that are off trend or a bit left field, means that you can get brand outcomes that aren't so trend based.
Absolutely. I think there's also some there's a process thing as well that's really important, where it's not about, we use references. You saw there was a bunch of references and things that we were just, as a mix and coming in and out of. That's actually just the world that we live in. Right now we're in a digital world where we're looking at references and things all the time, but you really cannot let those references drive your outcome. So you should never take references and go, oh, let's just make it like that. They need to just inspire you to come up with your own designs. In fact, if you've got a reference and it's sitting on the board, that means that you're not allowed to use it. You can't make it look exactly like that, because again, it already exists. So you've got to be quite disciplined about that, and then go, it's almost like it's better to not put references on the board, because it means that, we have to move away from there. If it's there, we go, oh, damn, we've already done it. So we move away from there. So you've really got to constantly push yourself to move out of that comfort zone and do something fresh and interesting. Clients will always pull you back into safe space anyway.
The next question is mistakes to avoid at the initial stage of branding. So I think that's good.
Yeah, the big mistakes is always the number one is definitely senior stakeholder involvement. So is the founder involved? Is the investor involved? Is the managing director involved? Is the CFO involved? If they're not involved, guaranteed to have problems on the project. So you have to make sure you've got them involved, because no founder will entertain like a significant rebrand or a significant repositioning or a new strategy or or even a new color palette, or even a new typeface or a logo, without being really engaged in the process fully and really understanding the process. So got to make sure that those senior people are involved. That's definitely number one.
And which is key to making a good brand identity that is timeless and ages well with time?
Oh, that's super hard, I think. I think you're really lucky if your identity lasts 5 years at the current rate of change. So to create like a classic or a time, designers work their whole lives trying to do that kind of thing. So I think you're really lucky if you do. I think classics and those ones often are almost like magical little blips. Multiple things converged at one time and you came up with something that was beautiful and simple, and it becomes a real classic. Striving for that is very, very challenging and very difficult. Although, it's great to kind of really try and do, wonderful, beautiful, inspirational work. But yeah, I think the classics they're hard to come by, and it's always there's multiple factors to make that work.
How do you overcome the C-suite doubters, the ones with all of the historical info poking holes and causing turbulence in the waters?
Is that it's probably in all the stages. So it's quite different, I think, in the strategic stage compared to the design stage. And there's often always different people causing trouble at different points along the way. Although there might be someone who wants to get involved at some point. I was working with the LEC, and one of the creative directors on their side actually had this fantastic term called swoop and poop. So he said the worst manager is like someone that swoop and poops. So they're not involved in the project at all. They haven't been involved for the whole, for ages. And then they see something and they just come in and they poop. They basically destroy it or leave some horrible challenge, and then they disappear. And there's a whole host of different characters. That's one of them. There's heaps. There's other people that are just always thorny, like I would say like a really critical, someone who's got a really critical mindset. They will never say something positive about the work, and they will always say something critical. I think you've got to identify who those people are, what is their motivations, what's driving them, why are they being difficult, and then you can potentially address some of their worries and concerns. Sometimes you actually have to hit that really head on and be quite brave about it. And, maybe you do a one-on-one meeting and you say, this is really difficult. The way that, this interaction is happening isn't helping this project to succeed. In fact, I think it's damaging the work. You can see we're doing fantastic work, but we're getting some really, you're making it really challenging for us. What do you need from us that will help us get across the line? So, and often they'll be, well, not always, but sometimes they'll be accommodating and really cool at that moment. Sometimes they might be difficult in that meeting, but what you'll find is in the subsequent meeting, they will probably not be difficult again, because they know that you are brave enough to address it head on, and they'll be a little bit more careful and conscious about being disruptive. So yeah, you've got to identify, is it just something someone's doing as a power play, or do they have a real specific challenge? So if they've got a specific challenge, so that was the first one I was talking about, but if they've got a specific challenge, like, that maybe they have a real issue around something, you just say, I don't have the answer right now. We'll look at it, we'll review it, you do the work, and you come back and you present an answer. If they're still being difficult at that point, then, you can be a little bit challenging yourself.
Brilliant answer. Thanks for all these great tips. We have one more question from Cherie, who is on the call today. Do you have any advice for adapting this process for solo creatives and non-profit clients? So all this wonderful creative process that you shared.
Just being confident enough to to stand there and take the necessary steps to the process, and slowing things down as a solo operator can be quite challenging. So I think, being confident that this is your role to slow things down as well as to speed things up is crucial in that. So,
and would you say you would go through all the same steps in the rebranding or branding process that you described, whether it is a non-profit, you're a solopreneur, you're an agency, or is there any adjustments that you would make to the whole process?
I think it does take a really long time. I think we've recently been trying to cut things in all kinds of different ways. And the reality is, to do really kind of a really strong brand that really works, is really distinctive, stands out in whatever category you're in, it is going to take, a really long amount of time. The benefit, if you're at least 8 to 16 weeks, at absolute, depending on the size of the business, of course. A big company might be 2 or 3 years in a rebrand. If you're an individual or a small team, it can be quite nice that you can have a bit more flexibility around the process, and you don't have to be as structured. If you're in an agency, or even sometimes in an internal agency, sometimes those deadlines and things can really kind of kill you and be very difficult. So sometimes it's really nice to, be a little bit more flexible around your timings and things like that. But I'd say the process stays pretty similar. It just might, meander a little bit more.
What if the client asked you to design a similar approach to a specific competitor? What would your response be?
Well, I definitely ask them what it is they like about that brand. What are the components that they really like about it, to get I'd firstly learn a little bit around why they're asking for that. 100%, I would say, what a silly idea, because you want to be different from that company, and it doesn't make any sense. That's the whole point around branding, is you want to create differentiation from that other one. I mean, occasionally people are like, oh, we want to make sure we stay in this space, but you can still create a point of differentiation and distinctiveness and interest within that space that they want to stay in. So I just listen to them, but I mean, of course, if they wanted to make it the same, I'd just be like, we're the wrong partner to work with you. You won't enjoy working with us, because we'll always have an argument every time. They've got to have the right intentions behind their branding approach.
Thank you. And Dale is asking how many branding projects the studio would typically take on at one time, and you can give example of your current workload versus, I don't know, Wolff Olins workload to give a different scale.
Yeah, so I think it's driven by team, by your, how many designers you've got, and your design team and strategy team and all of that. So typical project size for a branding project would be about 5 people, 5 to 10 at the biggest end. So, and it never really gets too much bigger than that. It's around teams. What I'd say is there's also roles. So senior designers, junior designers, midweight designers typically would, can handle, a couple of jobs maybe at once, but a more senior person can maybe handle up to 5, depending on pressures and timings and size and scale of the job. So, you have different roles can take on different levels. I mean, the way that we work, we're typically running probably 2 branding projects at once with our size team, plus some little fiddly bits around the edges of other projects or things finishing or timings or staggering out. Probably work on a couple of projects simultaneously. When it gets up to the size of like a Wolff Olins or a DesignStudio, they might have 20 or 30 projects running simultaneously within the business at any one time. So, And if ad agencies, might have hundreds, might have, really, really big ones have, might have heaps and heaps and heaps of jobs on.
Which is, what is the price range for brand strategy and visual identity in the UK?
I mean, you can look this up, you can use the internet to have a look, but typically the price would be somewhere between, I'd say at the very bottom end, the most bottomest end, that would be about £10,000 for an individual or maybe a duo or something like that to do a bit of design, like brand design. But what that will not include is strategy, purpose, positioning, behaviors, manifesto, copy, like heaps and heaps of stuff. There'll be a lot missing out of that. So what you'll get at that £10,000 end will be, you'll get a logo and a color palette, and that is it. You won't get anything else. You'll pretty much just get that. But then it goes all the way up to, you'd be looking at the very, very high end, you'd be looking at, for like a massive organization, year-long, 2-year-long project, you're going up into the millions of pounds for those projects, because you're running a team of 10 plus people constantly on that project all year, and you're also using potentially like super talented people to do it, so it can cost like a lot at that end. So, and pretty much literally everywhere in between that range is where you would go. Very rare would it go above like into the millions, like multi-millions. I don't think I've ever seen a project go up that high. So it would normally only ever go to like $1 million plus for a monster, for an absolute, like a real thorny job. And typical middle range, middle range would be like a big business, you'd be looking in the middle of that period. But again, timings a team all matter.
Brilliant. Andres, thank you so much for answering that question, and thanks for your insights. Thank you, Robyn and Campbell. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you, everybody.